Happy whatever day of the week it is that you're listening to us.
But we know it's Monday because we know how y'all do immediate listens.
Got them notifications set.
Wake up 4 a.m. Like, let me hit play on Carlie's couch. Man. I get it.
Shout out to the people who actually like watch the YouTube video sometimes on Sunday.
Yeah. I'm sorry, y'all, but I know it's 3 a.m. where y'all live, and that's kind of creepy, but also cool. Thanks.
Shout out to you.
But I think on YouTube they get the notification, so it probably is best actually. So send our channel to a friend. How about that? Like, send our YouTube to somebody, because then when they subscribe, they get the notification every time we upload. So it's also fun to watch or to have it on in the background, I guess.
Mm-hmm. That's how a lot of my friends who listen, they like are doing work or doing whatever, and then just have us kind of off to the side when you have a split screen. So
yeah, high key, I think maybe people will watch it a little bit more.
I think so too.
Sometime. But I never know, because also then I'll hear somebody talk about the podcast and like, oh, I didn't even know you was listening to it. And I'm pretty sure they just listen through the podcast app. So however you listen, we appreciate you. Keep listening, keep sharing, and spreading the good word.
Hey, so what are we talking about today, Lex?
So I had seen a tweet. I seen it. Man, this is a long time ago though, because I've actually had this sit in the draft for quite a while. But I saw a tweet, and the tweet said, "Is critical thinking something we can teach in schools?" And I was like, God darn, is it? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm beating Carlie up.
Trying to touch me.
I was like, is it? 'Cause I started thinking about it, and it made me ask, how could you go about teaching or learning critical thinking skills? Because it does seem like, you know, people just kind of say anything. Seems like, and I'm saying seems like because we know it's totally different the way you talk online versus, you know, what you really think or what you really do sometimes. But it does seem like it's just very easy to say something and just everybody just hop on it. And, you know, a lot of herd mentality that I see. And just in general, it just seems kind of like a little bit lack of common sense around a lot of things. And so I just wonder, like, is that something you could learn? And so what I did was some Googling and some researching to see that there are lots of articles and lots of information on why critical thinking is so important, what it is, and how you can improve your critical thinking skills. So that, boys and girls, is what we are talking about today.
And to answer her original question, yes. Why, yes, you can teach it.
So, Carlie, what comes to mind when you think of the term critical thinking? Like, how would you kind of paraphrase what that is?
I think it's being able to look at information and understanding that there are other nuances and complexities, and just seeing how everything kind of comes together, and then being able to base your decisions off of that. So just not taking something at face value and being able to understand how everything is connected to bring it to that point, or at least asking questions to better help you understand it.
Mm-hmm. When I hear critical thinking, damn, my tongue heavy as hell today. When I hear critical thinking, the first thing I think about is thinking for yourself. And then the second thing that was coming to mind for me was similar to what you said, being able to just connect thoughts and ideas. So being able to hear something and think about, that makes sense because of this, or connecting like how it's related to other things in order to come to like some type of conclusions or ideas based off of different information.
Yep. Do you feel like you're a critical thinker? And then if so, like why or why not?
I would say yes and no in some spaces. Yes, in the fact that I automatically tend to think in opposing views. So when somebody says something, I'm kind of thinking about, well, what about this or that? And trying to think of what are the other concepts that could influence like what that person said, or maybe there's other ways to think about it. I tend to be that person in conversation. But when it comes to things like academically, I very vividly remember in grad school, I was in, what was the class about? Violence in literature, or some violence, history of violence or something. And when we were reading things, it just like in English and stuff like that too, sometimes, you know, you'll be reading and it's like, so what is this about? And you're like, like, you know, it's about what they said. But they're like, no, you know, in the war, they did this. And so they were representing the hardships of this and that and that and that. And I used to, in class, be like always lost in the discussion because I'm like, well, I really didn't connect all that. But all right, like, I feel you, but it was just hard for me to read something and then tell you it's about not just exactly what it said. So I don't know, like that has always been difficult for me. And also I do think that I am swayed by passionate statements and arguments. However, on the critical thinking side, I do definitely at least 98% of the time, do my own research before I just re-spit and rehash things to other people. But if I'm talking to somebody and they're like, no, this album is great because XYZ, I'm like, yeah, it is a good album, I guess. And maybe I can be swayed. But when it comes to some things, especially like stuff I see on Twitter or online, I like to make sure I'm like looking it up, see some opposing views, see different information. So I think kind of a mix.
Yeah, I would say the same for me. I always research things, even my own thoughts. I always question things. I think with as big of a heart I have, as a big of a heart as I have, heavy. I have a really big heart, and so I'm always trying to find like the best in situations and best in people and all those things. And like Alexia said, sometimes I can be swayed by things, but I think on my foundational things, there's just things I'm not, and I will never be swayed on, and I will always be skeptical and ask questions. I think that's really healthy. I don't necessarily agree with cynicism, but if you do, that's your thing. I just personally don't, but definitely skepticism, like ask questions, like don't just take things at face value and think that they are as they appear to be, because a lot of times they're not. So I would say I definitely am. I would also say in academia, I think I go back and forth. It depends on the topic. The more I care about it, the more of a critical thinker I am. Because I remember we read The Heart of Darkness in high school, whatever, AP, whatever. We had to write this whole long essay about how this was this, and we did some Dostoevsky stuff and this, and I just didn't care. But I can see it. Like if I apply myself, I just don't care to apply my mind in that way for certain things because I don't care.
Yeah, so, maybe I just wasn't doing the work.
Yeah, I was about to say, the more I care about stuff, the more critically I can think about it, especially about topics that that spark interest and joy.
So then critical thinking by definition, there is a super jargony definition, and this was another one that I saw that is a little more, I think, clear and common language. But critical thinking is making reasoned judgments that are logical and well thought out. That's simple enough. It is a way of thinking in which you don't simply accept the arguments and conclusions you're exposed to, but rather have an attitude involving questioning such arguments and conclusions. So you're just not going with whatever you read or hear, but now you are analyzing that and coming to a conclusion based off of some different information or different things, which we'll get into again after this. So ways to critically think about information include conceptualizing, analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating information that can come from observation, experience, reflection, reasoning, and communication in order to guide your beliefs and your actions. So it's basically in all different ways. There's so many ways to think critically and so many places from which you can pull information, whether you had a conversation with a friend, whether you read something, whether you heard it, whether it was written in the sand, like whatever it is. But it's about how are you taking these things, actually thinking about them, and then, so I believe this, or I'm going to do this. So it guides those thoughts and actions, or beliefs and actions rather. And it makes sense to think critically so that those beliefs and actions are not going to lead you somewhere down some dark path or somewhere you don't need to be, or in a place of ignorance, etc. So obviously it's very important.
Yeah. And how is this different from everyday thinking? Like how is this different from like regular everyday thinking?
Oh, thank you. Because I keep trying to push that up. It's different because your day-to-day thinking is automatic thoughts, not necessarily like I don't have to think about breathing, not that automatic, but if I'm making my coffee, or if I'm doing things, like you're thinking, but it doesn't require you to but what about this versus this and that and that and that, or unless you're an anime character in which everything is fucking critical thinking because they be going ham for no reason at all
or me
every time. Yeah, but also it's the deliberate employment of the tools we just said. It's deliberately, I'm going to observe this. I'm going to look this up. I'm going to ask this question. And so to like be deliberate about putting the thoughts together and trying to explore the different ideas, that's what makes it different from everyday thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's really important. But to your point about our thoughts being the same, like not just like the breathing and the automatic things that your body does, but at a certain point in your life, and I think it's like around age 35, probably depending on who you are, about 90% of your thoughts are the same. And so if you don't use critical thinking, then, you know, your life is just on autoplay and autopilot, and you're not in taking new information and breaking things down and doing stuff. So yeah, I think it's important to think about.
Yeah. And I think it may be that because we all know folks who it's like, yo, it seems like they don't have any critical thinking. They just they never change their opinion or never change or never look for information. They just want to stick to like what they know, stick to what they think they know. But also I feel like with everybody, there's probably spaces you're more open to critical thinking than others, because we all also have confirmation bias where we want to, you know, once we believe something, then we're just going to stick with that and everything has to feed into that. But then there's other spaces where, that's not tied to my identity, or that's not very tied to something that I find important. And so you may be more open to understanding that. Like somebody could probably not have critical thinking around some political stuff, but then, well, when you don't have that runs into everything nowadays, which is so crazy to me. Because I was going to say something about like science, like maybe you're okay with like science and surgery over here, but it's like, I'm not okay with this thing. And it's just based off of what you hold true as your beliefs. And so it's important to be open. When you don't have critical thinking skills, what happens?
Man, you end up, well, like I just mentioned, you end up living a life on repeat and not really exploring things or figuring out your own beliefs or having your own identity. I think people can tell you who you are and what you believe and how you should act, and you just kind of rinse, follow, and repeat.
Mm-hmm. I think you can end up following crowds. And so I was thinking about cults and how we say you like drink the Kool-Aid, and it's like you're not having critical thinking skills, but you're listening to somebody, you're believing what they say, and you're just doing what they say. Do you think the same could be said of religion? I think for a few of them, quite a few, because I know a lot of people, and when I have conversations about Christianity, for example, and it's like, you haven't even read all these books that you're talking about believing. So that's interesting to me that you're just going with tradition and you're just continuing to do something that you haven't really studied a lot of times, which to me, that's what makes it like, oh man, I would respect the person who digs in, and if they're saying they believe something, they can talk about the whys, and they can talk about, just talk about what it is and why they think what they think. What else?
I'm laughing. I started laughing when you were talking about cults, not because cults are funny, because that's crazy. And we live in LA, and
I say cults can be at different levels.
Well, I was laughing because I was thinking of like Dallas Cowboys fans. It's like every year they think they're gonna win the Super Bowl, and I used to be a Dallas Cowboys fan, so I get it. But it's like, dang,
ain't real.
Like, come on, bro. Like, you see, the NFL ain't real. They have a lot of work to do. But you see at every level, it's like you're looking at all of this evidence to the contrary, and you're just choosing not to believe it because you're not. And that's like a funny example, but that's really like not using any type of critical thinking whenever you're not able to be real with yourself about things. And more into what Lexi was saying, I think about people, especially growing up in the South and in the Bible Belt, who just haven't, like, people quote unquote root for things or like believe in things that they haven't ever researched or looked into for themselves. Like, they're Republican because their mama's a Republican. They believe this because somebody told them to believe it, and they've never asked the question, why do I believe this? Why do I do this? Why do I think Fords are better than Chevys, when they've actually never like even researched? It's just something they've been socialized to think.
Yeah. And that's always been so weird to me, for people to not know why they rock with a thing or why they like a thing.
Because my mom
especially if you root for it crazy hard. So another thing is, and this kind of goes with the following crowds, but you root for things that you haven't examined. So think about like different movements: Black Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, any political type things, like all of those. It is easy to just be like, I'm gonna rock with that, but you have to examine them. Otherwise, like, what is that really about? Like we said at the very beginning, maybe even when All Lives Matter first came out, somebody be like, yeah, all lives matter. And you might be like, well, yeah, like all lives do matter. But to have the critical thinking to take that a step further to understand, like, okay, why do they only say this during certain times? Why is that not applicable at this point, or for this person, or for that? Why is it only a movement when people are talking about, hey, I don't want to get killed over here? And so to put all of that context together takes the critical thinking. Sure, all lives matter, whatever. But when people say that, what is really going on? And so to be able to look a little bit below the surface and the superficial of things is what critical thinking is about.
I think another important one is, like, whenever you believe in something so much and you take things as they are, that you're not able to see the obvious contradictions in kind of what's happening. And so thinking about, like, for example, the Confederate flag, well, it stands for the South. And maybe this is just, you know, compounding on Lexi's statement, but just like, bro, like, it doesn't actually stand for that. Do research. Also,
if we're like, go America, and we're talking about the Confederate flag, like, why are we talking about the Confederate flag when they were the traitors? That's the traitors flag. Like, some niggas didn't win. So it doesn't make sense. Like, it literally contradicts itself. All men created equally in our documents contradicts itself. And it's like, it's just weird. And it's like, why don't we have the critical thinking skills to make things make sense? But alas, I would say another thing, and this is more on the survival tip, is getting yourself in dangerous situations. If you do not have critical thinking skills, you may hop into that van with the guy trying to give you candy. You may go down this alley over here. You may not be paying attention to stuff going on because you're not thinking like, let me keep my eyes open. You may be counting your dollars as you come away from the bank, and it's like, bro, come on. And so I think those are kind of semi-extreme situations, but just paying attention and having the critical thinking skills to be aware of what's going on, who you're talking to, your environment, things like that are for your survival as well.
And thinking about, like, those situations, also thinking about anything you involve yourself in, like MLM schemes, like all of those things. Like, are you asking questions when people are like, man, you can make, like whenever people were first getting their first stimulus check, when the first stimmy dropped and everybody was like, oh, get in these giving circles, you put in $800 and in 3 weeks you're going to get $2,400 back.
Paid.
First people was getting bread, and then other people did not get bread. And they got screwed. About that. So just thinking about things like that, and even in relationships and friendships, like critically thinking about what's going on and with yourself, like, are my actions making sense? And like, there are infinite possibilities, like, when using critical thinking in ways that it can affect you. And I think it's just so important to make sure that you're taking the best care of yourself and keeping yourself safe and on the right path, like on the good foot.
And the positives and benefits of critical thinking, I think that it allows you to stay true to your values. So if you do believe in something, or you do have things that are important to you, to have critical thinking skills is only going to allow you to, let me consider this other opinion. Let me look at these other things, but they still should reinforce and can reinforce where you're standing. So it doesn't mean you have to be wobbly, but a benefit is that it kind of strengthens me. If I say I believe something and I do know that you think the opposite, but here's your points and I can counter those points, then that helps me to still stand firm in my values.
And you actually know what you're talking about. You know why you believe the things that you believe, and you can feel empowered of having made your own decision about stuff. And if you've been listening to The Bouch for a while, like, this is something that we've talked about, is like questioning our own beliefs about, why do I feel this way about this? Or, you know, why do I feel so strong about people not smoking weed, but I've never actually researched, you know, all the benefits and all these things. And so just making your own decisions, living your own life, and being your own person.
And in the same vein, you can make more informed decisions because you're critically thinking and therefore looking at different places and types of information to go into your decision-making process.
And when you apply this, you can, like, grow in any area of your life. So you're always taking in more knowledge. You're unlearning and relearning in ways that best serve you, whether it's business, friendship, life, whatever's going on. You're just able to continue growing. Like, critical thinking is a vehicle to continue expansion in your life.
Yeah. And if you care about critical thinking, or if you value critical thinking, then you're not afraid of being wrong, and you're not afraid of what you hold true being shaken up. And I think that's very important in order to continue to grow. And like we said, to survive. So survival is one of the benefits of critical thinking, because as man has grown over the years, you have to have that critical thinking to understand, like, that's a hole of snakes over there, or food is over here, or here's how to start this fire, or here's how to take care of myself when I got a cut. Like all of those things that allow us to still be here, because you have to have the critical thinking to observe and to pay attention and to process and to think.
I think that's actually something that might keep people from critically thinking and asking themselves the questions, you know, to grow and challenge their beliefs. Because if you define yourself on your values and you hold these things as your foundation that you've never questioned, you don't want to shake them up, because then who are you without them? But that's really the way you get to know who you are, is by challenging those things. And that can be really uncomfortable, learning that you're wrong, or that you've been saying all lives matter, looking like an asshole, like, you know, all of these things. But that's the point of growth, is like always becoming the best version of ourselves.
I think it's just laziness too. I think, you know, we don't want to think about things. And especially with social media and the way our news cycles are now, people are putting in front of you all day, like what to think and what to say. And this is what you should believe, or this is what you should be angry about today. And instead of having to think about it or go Google some things to make sure before we retweet this, it's easy to just go with that flow. So I think a lot of times it is just kind of a laziness.
So we know why it's good for us. We know some of the things that hold us back. How do we actually get better at critical thinking?
One of the first things that I saw in getting better at critical thinking is to ask basic questions. And so in general, we've been mentioning it throughout this, but questioning, ask questions, but ask basic questions. Some of the best solutions are because of their simplicity. So seek simple solutions first, and then go back to basic questions like, what do I already know? How do I know that? What are you trying to prove? What are you overlooking? These types of things are ways to question yourself. If you're trying to think about something or understand something, question what you already know and why you know it. Well, that could be biased because of this. And it's just asking basic questions. That gives you a place to start thinking.
And if it's like looking at, like, maybe let's say you're looking at the war or whatever historical event, or you're trying to figure out like a movement, who, what, where, when, why. Like that was in another article that I saw. It's like literally just writing those things down and sitting and pondering on them. And then questioning your assumptions about things. Like if we really want to get to innovation, we have to question, like, man, does gravity really work the way we think it does? Like, because Newton didn't get to that just by like, oh man, things just fall just because, you know, and figuring out these bigger, greater, overarching themes and
that's why we know, like,
forms in life.
The earth's not flat, because that's the assumption everybody knew. Like there's so many things that we knew, and then we realized, oh, we don't know shit, because now this ship went all the way around and came back to the same point. The world can't be flat. Or I mean, people still believe that, but in just different things. That's how invention happens, by questioning what we already assume is true. So always be open to questioning those things.
Yeah, and looking at like even flight. Like they're like, man, the only way we can get around is walking, until somebody came up with a wheel, until somebody came up with a train, until somebody came up with a plane. Like you just got to question those things.
Spaceship out of here now. Also, be aware of your own mental processes. So we all have bias. You may recognize certain prejudices that you have. You may recognize certain things about the way you process and think. And so to be a critical thinker, you have to be aware of that yourself. So just pay attention to how you think. You may be skewed toward a certain thing, but now question that.
Yeah, and even if you feel like it's a good thing, still question it. Like if you're like, well, if you feel self-righteous about like your belief, like, well, I should believe this. Like I would challenge you to still question those things to better get to know yourself and to continue evolving. Whenever you're looking at things that are happening, evaluate like all of the evidence that's present, and then start thinking about like who gathered it, because the hunters write the history books, and so we all know that the history books are fucked up, and a lot of times not accurate. They don't include Black and brown people or real origin stories, and so a lot of the things that we've been socialized to believe are inherently wrong and biased and racist and feminist, or not feminist, but part of patriarchy. And so, you know, really just looking at who put this together. Like, why would they want me to believe this certain thing, and figuring out what you believe for yourself.
Another thing, if you're feeling stuck and you're trying to figure something out, or trying to jumpstart your creativity, or think critically about a problem, is to try reversing things. So like, if kind of like chicken and egg type thing, you might be like, oh yeah, chicken came first because you have to lay the egg. But now it's like, but what if the egg was there first? What does that mean? And so try reversing things and then ask yourself, what does it mean if this was the other way around? That would at least start opening you up to kind of different creative thinking, thinking about it in a way that is not just the usual go-to.
And then another way is to diversify your thoughts. So examining ideas from different people, maybe from people who, don't believe what you believe, or from people who are from different countries, or have different professions or different whatever. Like, the way we all look at the world is so vastly different, and you have no idea like how, something that somebody said could spark an idea in you that you're like, oh man, that actually changes everything I thought.
Mm-hmm. Another way to sharpen your critical thinking skills is to think for yourself. So if you have questions before you hop on Google, before you start, diving into things, like sometimes just kind of take that inward look, like, what do I think about this? And, or let's say you're in a particular situation, like, what does my instinct really kind of say about what I should be doing here, if it's something fast or quick? And sometimes we still have to honor our gut instincts, especially if we're lined up, of course, in the right way. But think for yourself, and then from there, we can start questioning like that as we have time or whatever's going on allows.
Yeah, and I think with that also sitting in silence sometimes and letting things marinate before you start Googling and before you start researching, like maybe you just really sit and think with yourself. Other ways are to express yourself through different mediums. So if you're always like a person who writes a to-do list, maybe you try to draw, or maybe you try to make a chart, or maybe you do a bar chart or whatever, like trying different things to express and explore, and that might turn on the creative side of your brain and help you get to new solutions.
I love the next one. It's talk to a 6-year-old. So if you can practice explaining abstract ideas in simple terms and breaking them down, that means you actually have a good understanding of something. If you cannot break it down and make it very simple, which a lot of times it's so funny, because if somebody asks like, oh, how does baking work? Like, how does a cake bake in the oven? Like, you really might have difficulty. It feels like, oh yeah, I know, but to explain it might seem to be a challenge. And so talking to kids is always fun and interesting, because they're going to be like, yeah, but how does that make sense? Or why is that happening? And they will question you. And so that's a good way to sharpen your critical thinking skills.
And man, I know all the parents are like, not again. Not again.
Yeah, you know how kids are like, why this? Why that? Why is this? And it's like, damn, like you really got to come up with some responses out here.
Man, but I caught myself the other day. Somebody was asking me to explain like the benefit of something that I did, or like what I did, and I was using way too many words. I was like, damn, I don't know what I'm talking about right now. Good God.
So you like that sometimes, like, you know what, I don't even know, fam.
So you just keep talking to try to like make it make sense, but you notice when you start using too many words, you don't really know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I don't know.
So
shit.
Another way is to ask people to explain their thought processes, like asking them like, how would you evaluate this? Or how do you think about this? Or how would you break this down? By asking them and then seeing how they do it, it helps you kind of refine your own process and expand the way you look at topics and break them down and take them in.
Mm-hmm. And our last tip for becoming a better critical thinker is to surround yourself with other critical thinkers. And we all know folks who ask a lot of questions. Actually, in one of my friend groups, they call me like I'm their why guy, because no matter what they talking about, I'm like, yeah, but why? Or why do you think that? Or why should you do it that way? And at least it just sparks them to ask more questions or to think more about things. But we definitely also know our friends and our people who, no matter what we say, they're just gonna be like, yeah. And so that's cool sometimes, but surround yourself with other critical thinkers, and I think it'll help you to exercise that muscle as well.
Absolutely. And then our question of the week this week is,
I don't know. It's on my third day here.
But that's not here.
We don't have nothing written down today. Let's see. What can our question of the week be?
I mean, it could be around critical thinking.
But it's hard. I was gonna say something like, what can you question, or how can you? Maybe it's how. This is too easy, but whatever. It's low hanging. Carlie, this week, what's something that you're going to do to sharpen your critical thinking skills?
Ooh, I like that. I don't think this. Well, it's low hanging fruit to answer. It's higher hanging fruit to actually implement and put it into to action into my life. But I would say I'm going to spend some time, like each day, questioning why I do things the way that I do. So I have like little routines and things. And so maybe I'll spend some time questioning myself for things that I've never questioned. So I question myself a lot.
I was about to say, you already do that though.
I do that, but I mean, like, for example, like my workouts, like I tend to like do things in a certain way, and I'm like, well, why? I actually want to sit with them and maybe challenge myself to do them differently this week. Not just workouts, but other things.
I think a good question to ask yourself is there another way to do this?
Yeah,
that's
like
a good
there
question to ask. This week, what I'm going to try to do is I want to dabble more in some different mediums. So to answer some of the like questions I've been having, or like biz dev type stuff I've been thinking about and doing, I want to do a little bit more in like art and like drawing, like just literally like pen to paper type stuff this week, instead of trying to like just type up my list and my things like that. I want to kind of visualize it and have it kind of mapped out.
Oh, that's dope. I like that question. So what are you going to do this week to sharpen your critical thinking skills? Hit us up at Carlie's Couch, at Lextopia, at CC Fierce on Instagram, Carlie Carpio on Twitter, and let us know how you're going to sharpen your skills.
Attract these down pieces. And on that note, I think we're out of here.
Bye, y'all.